Hey guys, I'm Dani Castellano, and this is Diet Culture. Today I got to speak with Constance Weissmuller, MSRDN. Connie is a registered dietitian nutritionist in Denver, Colorado. She is passionate about eating disorder recovery, intuitive eating work, and nutrition therapy for all bodies. She counsels clients one-to-one in her private practice in person in Denver, Colorado, as well as virtually all across the country. She also enjoys teaching human nutrition at a local community college from a weight-neutral perspective and has recently created an e-course so that more people interested in nutrition can learn from her. Compassion, honesty, and humor are values she carries throughout all of her work. I super loved chatting with Connie today. We're both in Denver. Even though we did this virtually, that was just a cool factor. She has been teaching at a community college, like in her bio, and she shared that she's turned that into an e-course, and that all came up because I asked her about how she likes to start bridging the conversation about health at every size and intuitive eating and weight stigma. And so that was a super cool thing. We chatted about ageism, we chatted about some of our diet culture pet peeves, and I can't wait for you guys to give it a listen. Hi Connie, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, Dani?
Doing well. It's really nice to get to see you kind of
Yeah,
live.
I know. I hope one day we could. Do you think you'll ever record with people like in real life, or do you think it's always going to be like a telehealth situation or telehealth virtual?
I know, that's where my brain goes too.
Oh my
You know,
God.
I record out of my closet in our 900 square foot home that we rent. So,
So maybe not.
like, it would have to be a whole thing for that to
You'd,
happen. But
you'd
we'll
have to
see.
invite someone over to sit in your closet with you. It'd be a little cozy.
Yeah, I don't think that would be the most comfortable situation.
Well, I'll do it if you want to, do this again. I would join you in
Oh
your
my God, I love
closet.
it.
Yeah.
So I want to know how you entered this space of our profession, because it is not the norm to be in the intuitive eating, haze, healing relationship with food space.
Yeah. Um, I first dipped my toes in this space without even really knowing it, I think. I was in grad school at the time. I went to Cal State LA. I was born and raised in LA, and I came home from college in Chicago to live with my parents. And I was like, I guess that's the program. I made it in. It's in-state tuition. It was great. But
Uh-huh.
everything that I was learning in the program seemed to be what my old eating disorder brain would tell me. And I started to get, really weirded out. I was like, this just sits not well. And I wasn't sure why until I started to learn and see things, I think, on social media, on people's blogs about kind of this weight neutral approach. And before speaking up in any of my classes, I did my best to read as many articles as I could. I think I read Health at Every Size, Intuitive Eating, all the stuff, and
Mhm.
started kind of pushing back. Because to a certain degree, I use this word now, I didn't know it at the time, but I was like, this is kind of unethical, right? To be talking about this, right? You're basically teaching a group of, a cohort of 20 future dietitians eating disorder behavior. And I wanted that to not be the case. And so that's kind of where I started. And I think my cohort appreciated it. I think they were annoyed with me probably towards the end of the 3 years we spent together. But because that's all, I was like, well, actually, in this perspective, right? Like I would push back on everything. But I think that's where I started. And then I wanted to do my internships to be focused at least a little bit in intuitive eating, counseling, health at every size. And so I had the opportunity to do that. And that was cool. And then I started this work, I think, as a lot of us do, in a group practice or in our own practices or in a treatment center, and then moved from there.
That is so cool. Like, how brave of you to speak up when you were hearing something that goes against the status quo.
Yeah. I think, yeah. I think it is brave, and I think it's also like necessary to a certain degree, you know?
Yeah.
Sorry if that's loud. I live on a busy street,
Oh, that's
which
okay.
is not good for recording. I apologize.
Okay.
That picks up.
Usually our dog Sawyer is interrupting my recordings, but he's occupied with my mother-in-law right now, so
Oh,
that's helpful.
love you. Thank you. But yeah, so I think I don't know if there's much else to add to that. I had some outside internships during grad school. I think that got me better prepared. Um, you know, I worked for Robin Noling. She's the real life RD.
Oh, yeah.
And so that was really awesome. I just learned so much from her. And then I worked at a treatment center in LA for a little bit as an intern and did the counseling at Cal State LA, which is where I learned a ton. And I think that started to fuel the fire, right? I learned that a lot of clinicians were not willing to even hear me. One, it could have been I was like a student at the time, you know, so I think a lot of people don't think students have things to share, which is a shame because they do.
I know.
Right? But the other part was just like, that's fat phobia, right? Like ingrained so deeply into the medical field that they wouldn't listen to a different perspective. And so that got me angry, I think, and fueled more work. So
I
yeah.
resonate with the anger a lot. That's how I feel. I
Yeah.
think about all things diet culture, and especially like working with a higher level of care at this point, just thinking about some of the things that people encounter that lead them to where they are in their eating disorder. It's just so infuriating, just knowing the societal pieces that really influence it.
Yeah, totally. Very like acceptable societal pieces, right? It's like
Yeah.
a normal thing to go to the doctor and step on the scale, right? Or to be told, you know, a weight loss lecture when that doesn't need to be the case, but it is so normalized that we think it is.
Yeah,
You know, and we don't know how harmful it could be.
I know. I remember when I was an outpatient for about 3 years before switching to residential PHP
Yeah.
level of care just for eating disorders.
Mhm.
I had a small percentage of the population I worked with by the end that was like healing relationship with food. I really had realized that's where I wanted to go with everything. And I
Yeah.
remember trying to create this graphic to help one of my patients with advocating for not getting on the scale when they
Yeah.
go to the doctor. And it's just such a wild thing to have to like invent resources to help someone be able to advocate for themselves of how to get like just neutral
Yeah.
medical care rather than everything being focused on their weight. It's
Yeah.
just so there. It's our culture. It's ingrained, like you said, with the fat phobia, and
Mhm.
trying to like chip away at it can be such a difficult experience, especially for people in different sized bodies. But just to be, like you said, speaking against what's happening, that's so hard to do, whether you're a professional or you're just trying to advocate for yourself in a one-to-one situation at like a new provider's office.
Yeah. I think that's we don't know how hard that is until you try. Because I think one of the things I've learned is to do my best to use my own thin privilege to be able to advocate. And if my provider is willing to listen, to share a little bit. And I'm like dripping sweat. Like I'm like, I'm like, this is so scary. And I want to do it, you know?
Yeah,
Um,
very much. And I think like that's whenever you're the one holding the privileges, it really is your work to do more than anyone else. So I
yeah.
totally feel that. Um,
Yeah.
I have the past few years when I've even someone like a we have a financial advisor.
Yes.
She was trying to relate to me um, in a way of
Oh
like
no.
dieting and like budgeting, and I was like, hold on a second, I need you to understand that by saying things like that to me, because I'm actually like really passionate about healing and not dieting, that I'm not going to have like a trusting relationship with you. And so just even like realizing that things people say to you about food and bodies outside, and she was super wonderful about it, and we have a great like working relationship now. But I just,
Awesome.
like, I need you to know, like, you can't talk to me like that, because it's
Right.
I worry, like, why are you saying that? Like, not because like I'm worried about what she thinks of me as a person, but more of like professionally, and just like trying to work through that. So it's
Right,
just,
and if she's using that example for other people, right?
yep.
It's like, why do we
Yeah.
have to relate everything to dieting or diet culture? But it
Yeah.
all often comes back.
I know. It really is the way than to join the conversation, but I agree,
Mm,
I want to be as vocal as possible, and so, like, the number of times that, like, I find myself just going silent,
totally.
to avoid, sometimes that feels like the easier way. Sometimes I give myself the out of, like, "Well, like, I have my podcast, like, I do this work,
Right.
40 hours a week," so it's like
Yeah.
sometimes I don't wanna talk about it.
Oh, yeah, and it's not like I think it's right, even going like, "We always have to do it," is like an all or nothing mentality, right? It's like, if you have the mental capacity, you have the energy to do it, but also we're human and we're zapped, and that's okay. I think, um, we're all doing the best that we can. I really think
Mhm.
that, and, you know, you try when you can.
Yeah, absolutely. Something that you said a moment ago sparked, an additional question. So I'm gonna give you a little background. I have to,
Sure.
like, explain my questions for them to make sense,
Yeah,
but
yeah, just close my
I
head.
think part of the difficulty of the work of breaking down diet culture is just the abrasiveness of hearing terms like fat phobia and like systemic oppression and health at every size when you have no clue about them,
Yeah,
especially when you've internalized those messages and you think that's what you have to do to be well and to be like a positive member of society. And I was wondering how you kind of approach that with people, because especially in an outpatient setting, I imagine that must be difficult, and I love hearing different perspectives of just how you navigate that, or some of your favorite, like, resources that you share, because, um,
yeah,
it's such a difficult piece of that for the one trying to educate and for the person receiving the information.
yeah. It is hard, and I think where this comes up for me more than in, like, my practice, because I think once
Mhm.
people are sitting with me, they read my website, they kind of get the work they're about to do, but it's, I teach at community college, and I teach a general nutrition class, and
Ooh.
yeah, and so that's like that's a big, passion thing for me. I mean, I don't make a lot of money from it by any means, but, I
I'm glad
really
you love it.
yeah, I love it. And so that's important. But I teach during a regular semester 1 week on like eating disorders, weight stigma, and mental health, 1 to 2 weeks on that. And I
Okay.
have all my students do the Harvard weight bias quiz.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And that brings up a lot of feelings, right? Because no one wants to admit and say, yeah, I prefer thin people, right? But we have internalized this bias because we live in society. And so I think the best thing that I can do is to open up a discussion. I always make sure that we have a discussion post or time for questions, or I stay for office hours, whatever, in case people are needing extra room.
Sure, sure.
Um, but I think more than anything, I've never been in a situation where someone's like, absolutely not. Because
Right.
when you sit there, they're like, oh, that actually makes sense when you teach me the science, right?
Mhm.
So, but if there is a lot of backlash, I love to give the resources of like the Association for Size, Diversity, and Health, um, kind of like a fun video, like Poodle Science. Have you
Oh,
seen
yeah,
Poodle
that's
Science?
that is a
Okay,
good one.
yeah,
You're saying things that I'm, like, remembering that I've used before, and then, you kind of
yep,
focus in on a couple things at a time, and then some of the other things go out the window.
yeah. Yeah, and so I think those are the biggest things, and but just really having a dialogue, and again, like knowing that I am a privileged, like a thin privileged person,
Mhm.
and so like partly like who am I to talk, right? And so like just I think my job is to facilitate an open discussion and then see where that goes. Like my goal is to educate a little more than they would ever get, probably from a nutrition class, and then to see where
Yeah.
they go with that. So so I think resources and just the space, a holder of space. I think that's what we do.
Yeah. That's so cool that you have that like opportunity to do that in a different way because it's so needed that
Yeah.
Nutrition 101 include things like that. But like
Yeah.
you said, a similar experience of like I remember the first time I learned like a lot about nutrition in our major that was like opening doors to disordered behavior for me at that time because I was like, oh, like I was seeking some of that information and it turned into something
Sure.
a little bit of a different experience for me. But I think that
Yeah.
happens a lot. And there was just the talk about like how to lose weight with calorie deficit, but no talk about the concept that someone could be healthy in a larger body or
Right. Or the consequences of that restriction, right?
yeah.
And the rebound.
Yeah.
And I think what I wish I actually had this more in undergrad, and I try and combine all my schooling and give my students like what I wish I had,
Uh-huh.
right? I did a health science degree at DePaul for my undergrad, and I got such a well-rounded education, I felt like, because I learned about like public health, access to care, didn't learn about weight stigma, did that later, right? But like just like safety in accessing care. What if English isn't your first language and you're trying to go to a doctor and they're giving you like 6 medications? Like we have to like set the scene for nutrition, right? Because that's one thing that contributes to our health, but there are so many other things that are out of our control that no one talks about,
I
like
know.
like genetics.
No.
So that's part of like what is important for me to teach about, right? And I think important to talk about even with clients, right? That there's more than just this meal plan, right, in a higher level of care maybe, or there's more than just this meal that we're focusing
Mhm.
on, this food, right? There's other things that contribute to our health as a whole that we can work on to be a well-rounded
Yeah,
person.
absolutely. I guess, like, for whatever reason, diet culture has really honed in on nutrition and exercise as being the things that I guess because those are the things you can make money off of, and that's
Right.
what, for whatever reason, is appealing, but it
Mhm.
really is the longer I do this work, the more I find that, like, nutrition education is really so simple because
So simple.
the like convoluted crap that you get is just anchoring diet culture. It's not like actually useful on an individual level, but that's what people seek out like because we're taught that that's what you need. And like
Mhm.
I sought that out in going to school to become a dietitian. Like I wanted to know all these things, and the more and more it's like, oh well, it's actually not that exciting unless
Yes.
you decide to be like a holistic vegan, like, and that's all you talk about. And like, no offense to anyone that makes those
Yeah.
decisions,
Sure.
but
Yeah.
there's certainly like the integrative, holistic nutrition
Mhm.
science that it makes it seem more difficult and complicated and interesting. But I find it to be actually quite simple.
I agree with you. And I think it comes back to what do you value,
Yeah.
right? And I personally value, yes, my health. Some people don't value their health. That's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
I value
I,
my health.
I agree. It's
Yeah,
okay if that's your choice.
sure. It is a choice. Well, sometimes it's not, depending
Yeah.
on access, right? And
No,
income and
we're on
but
the same wavelength.
right, but you know what I mean. So like for me, it's a choice and I'm
Yes.
grateful to have that choice, but also within that value of health, like I do not want it to be a huge part of my brain. Right? Like I think a lot of our clients when we ask them how much of your brain is taken up by body, food, exercise, right? A lot of them would be in the high 80s,
Mhm,
90s maybe.
mhm.
I used to be there and
Yeah,
maybe
for
you did
sure.
too. Yeah.
Yep.
And I don't know, maybe I'm at like a 10%, like I need to think about dinner for the week or like, ooh, I could really go for that meal that I love, right?
Yeah.
But it's such a small part of my life. And I think that's why nutrition is easy to me, right? It's like, I know the components of my plate and I move forward because
Yeah.
I have other things that are of higher value to me right now, like my work or my relationships or rest, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
So, yeah, but I do agree in that it's doesn't have to be as complicated as diet culture leads us to believe.
Yeah. And I think like when I think about, okay, what are the barriers to that besides it just being like uncommon knowledge that it's that simple? And then, of course, we talk about access to food and if
Mhm.
pursuing health is even a, something that can be your priority or accessible to you. The fat phobia in our culture and knowing like that was always the hardest sell for
Mhm.
intuitive eating. I don't really get to do that anymore because the lowest level of care I do is PHP now. It's not time for intuitive eating yet, but I just the hardest sell was always, well, you may stay the same weight, you may lose weight, or you may gain weight, and so it is. This is the opposite of a diet, which is the point, but it gets. I think. Would you agree that a lot of people think intuitive eating is a diet now, and like try
Yeah,
and keep it like that?
totally. Right.
Okay.
I think they latch on a lot to the hunger and fullness aspect of it, which
Hmm.
is great because I think a lot of people do lose their hunger and fullness cues for a variety of reasons,
Yeah.
but it's so much more nuanced, right? Um,
Yes.
and it's like, I think about the way that I want to market myself in the future in terms of my services, right? And I'm like, I gotta get off social media because more than anything, it like makes me mad these days to see like people promoting intuitive eating in a way that it's just like blatantly not what it's supposed to be. Or
Yeah.
like I get sick of influencers that like I know they have good intentions, but like are promoting something so dangerous. I'm like, I don't want to be here anymore.
I
Like
know.
it's hard.
It is really hard. Did intuitive fasting break your brain when that came out?
To be honest, I did not pick, like when that blew up, I just put my phone away. I did not engage. I made a conscious choice. I also can't remember when that was. It's been a lot going on in my life. So I was like,
That's fair.
I'm gonna sit this one out. But yes, it does break my brain because that makes intuitive fasting is when we go to bed and we don't eat.
I know.
Cool.
Ugh, at least some good memes came out of that.
Yes, I did appreciate, and I love the creative people in this space that can make amazing memes because I don't have that particle in my brain. I just don't.
Yeah, every now and then I think of one, but I have no idea if it actually would be that funny to anyone else, but it
Yeah,
makes
it's
me
like, do we have to pass it to our friends to make sure like it's actually funny? And
yeah,
then are they gonna be truthful with us or not? Like I don't want it to flop.
right. That's just embarrassing.
Yeah. I can't take that blow to my self-confidence.
Oh my goodness. So you may have answered this, but what do you find to be one of your biggest pet peeves of diet culture?
Hmm. I think the top of the line, and I think this is just an oldie but a goodie, is just juice cleanses because I think they're so annoying. Like I said, born and raised in LA, and you're around pressed juiceries like on every other corner it feels like, and just the other week I was on the train from Denver to the airport, and there was a group of gals getting ready for a bachelorette weekend and they had all done a juice cleanse and I was like trying to cover my ears but then I just wanted to listen more because I like drop like I'm that person. I won't say anything, but I was just listening and I turned to my boyfriend. I was like, are you hearing this?
Oh my god.
And yeah, it just makes me sad at this point. Like that, I mean, the whole wedding industry is a whole nother thing, but like the fact that these people had to like do this to be able to go on the weekend makes me worried,
No,
right?
it's really a bummer. And
Yeah.
just like coming back to the like lack of effectiveness of something like that. Um and just putting your body through it just to feel like lose some water weight and what is that really doing?
Yeah. It exactly. What is it really doing? It's just I think it's a expensive way to feel hungry.
Yeah.
And
Have you watched Schitt's Creek?
yes.
we're going back through it. I find it so much funnier the second time, actually.
Okay,
I'm
I
more
might do
invested in the
that.
characters.
Yes.
But the first season, there's a scene where Alexis is at the diner with Ted and she's doing a juice cleanse and he's like complaining to Twyla how her like brain isn't working. He's like, I wish you would just eat something. And I didn't catch that the
I did
first
not
time
I have
through.
no recollection of that scene.
And I was like, wow, that's like really pointed because it they actually fully encompassed the problems of people doing juice cleanses,
Yes.
but in such like a witty, quick way.
Mhm.
And I was like, just seeing it again for some reason that clicked in my brain of like, yeah, that's like not a positive thing to not have your brain working. And we know anytime you're gonna restrict, like for me personally, I feel it within going of an hour or two longer than I'm supposed to. I start to get that
Same.
lack of brain function is what it feels like. But we know that your brain can't work, and it's like I certainly don't want to like put intelligence on like a pedestal of saying people are less than, but you want your brain to be functioning for you.
Yeah,
And
for
that's just such a
sure.
bummer when you're restricting, whether you end up with a full-blown eating disorder or you're just on a diet, like your brain can't work for you. And
Yeah.
you're not probably going to realize how much until you're adequately nourished.
Yes. I think about that concept actually often because I had a really hard time with some of my studies in college. I was a very dedicated studier and I did very well most of the time, but there were some classes like I think chemistry just sucks. Sorry.
Mhm.
It's very hard. But I was also in the middle of this like pretty restrictive phase. I taught fitness classes. I was vegetarian for no reason. It was very rough. And I always wonder because and there's nothing wrong with C's because C's get degrees. But in chemistry, I had gotten a couple C's to get through all of it. And I was like, wait, looking back, I wonder if I would have been able to concentrate or grasp the concepts a bit better if I was fully nourished and if I wasn't thinking most of the time about my body and food when I wasn't thinking about school. Those are literally my two things I thought about.
Yeah, that's such an interesting curiosity. I remember like always feeling guilty for my late night. Like if I would get a coffee from Starbucks later in the evening, like how much sugar is in this? Or worrying if I was eating like I would eat like nuts and dark chocolate. It was one of my
Oh,
favorite study snacks.
yep,
And just like knowing the calories in it and being like, oh, did I really need to eat this? And it's like that's going through my brain while I'm trying to actively retain new information. So how
yep,
much of that was I totally can reflect on that too of like
yeah,
there definitely wasn't full productivity happening because
no,
I was preoccupied and
yeah,
oftentimes not eating enough.
right. And maybe there was like that you were preoccupied in a way that was positive with school, but for me, I realized that I lacked in a lot of like social, like I was very social. I was in a sorority and had great roommates and all that stuff. But I, um, I feel like when I look back at my friends in college, I was like, man, I really didn't do what you guys did until senior year because I was so scared of the, like, what if they order pizza? Like,
Mm,
what if I get a drink at the bar or another, like a second drink? What would happen, right? Like, calorie wise, that's where my brain would go rather than like, yeah, I'd like to be social for another hour and connect with people. Like, that's where my brain goes now. And I'm like, thank God.
yeah.
It's just so much easier to have like a full intentional life instead of thinking about food in your body and maybe work or school, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And diet culture really likes to latch on to that aspect of like being social, of like not eating food when you're drunk or making sure you get the lowest calorie beverages. And so it's it's definitely I remember learning about the term drunkorexia while
Oh,
I was in college
yep,
because and that's so true.
yep. My whole sorority did that.
Yeah.
It was really sad, and I don't think anyone was there to like teach them any better, you know?
Probably not.
Um, and I think I don't think every college or every sorority or Greek life or is like this by any means, but I do think it's more encouraged in certain places. And it's really hard because, I think Instagram came when I was a freshman in college, right? But now there's like teens, right, that are growing up with this and the influences and trying to be perfect or seeing the fit spo models on their For You page and stuff. I just can't imagine like what that's gonna do. And I don't want to go all the way down that path, but like I feel like it can't be good.
Yeah, no, I agree. Sometimes I feel like I'm being like I sound like I'm out of the loop or something when I'm like, oh, I worry about like young people with this technology. But I remember like just comparing myself to what I had access to. So like Victoria's Secret models or
Mm.
celebrities on the front cover of magazines or my favorite um, actresses like Disney Channel shows or
You
whatever,
know what? You're
And
right. There's always been something. It hasn't just been social media.
but
You're
now it's like I think way easier because how many times do you see? I don't even know why I have this content accessible to me because I'm like, why does this algorithm think I want to see this? But like the before and after, like the weight loss reels,
right.
things like that. And it's just very, like, very, very, very toxic.
Yeah.
Um, or the what I eat in a day, where it's like frighteningly low amounts of food for any human being, and
Yeah.
to have that kind of stuff because I'm looking at articles about nutrition from a magazine I get once a month, but this could come up unlimited amounts of times just by scrolling through your phone,
Yes.
like through advertisements or through just
Yeah.
reading other people's pages in front of you.
Yeah. I know. I do agree that it's way more accessible. And we're so prone to like, okay, I'm gonna pick up my phone if I'm bored, right?
Yeah,
And so we just have more access.
yeah. So I agree. It's definitely like frightening, um,
Yeah.
for sure.
Very.
Do you think that you really will like move away from social media, or do you just say that in like a ranty kind of way?
I I don't know. I enjoy social media because I like the way that I can connect with people, and I learn actually a ton.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, me too.
yeah, so I probably say that as a joke right now, but I also think about I had a therapist in grad school in LA. I just adore her, and I remember trying to find her on the internet, and I was like, Where's your website? Where?" She's like, I have nothing." She had a full
Oh,
private practice, lived a very intentional life, and I was just amazed. And I was like, that is the life I kind of want in the future. I don't want to be, at least for right now, I'm not sure I want to be like promoting myself on social. I have no idea, but I aspire to have that level of just like ease.
yeah,
So it's inspiring, I think,
yeah.
more than anything, and an idea maybe for the future, but not right now. I'll stay.
Okay. That's an interesting thing to hear because I get worried when I look for providers and I can't find a website because I'm like, are you sketchy? Like, is this legitimate? So that's so interesting to hear that someone would like intentionally just like kind
Yeah.
of go off the grid and exist in their practice.
I think she had a Psychology Today profile. Like she was there,
Sure.
but she was just so well plugged in to
Mm-hmm.
LA, like incredibly plugged, and in a way that was really authentic for her. And that's something I've thought about personally for my
Yeah.
practice and like what aligns with my values. And I much prefer grabbing a coffee with a therapist or something to connect and see if we'd be a good fit in referrals versus like posting on a Facebook group, right? It's just not, it doesn't feel good to me. So I think I just more align with like the idea of being a little less online. Maybe not
Mhm.
total, but a little less, if that makes sense.
Yeah. That's a like I love the idea of that. I don't know myself if I would get there or not, but that is I don't have a private practice that I have to like have a website for, but
Yeah.
that is a cool like thought process.
Yeah. Who knows? Yeah. Um, yeah. I think that's the idea. Just middle ground.
Yeah. So you said that you were teaching fitness classes in school.
Oh
Do,
yeah,
how has movement like shifted for you within this space?
I love that question. So yes, I did. I taught Zumba, and
Fun.
yeah, it was really fun. I had a blast, and then I got really sick of Zumba. Because I was just like, oh my gosh, I don't get to enjoy doing it anymore because I have to. I think
Mhm.
that's what brings a lot of joy out of movement for people, is that they feel like they have to, or they actually have to, like they actually have to teach the class. Um, and so for me, a big part of this, like building a healthier relationship with movement, was quitting teaching altogether. Just
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
yeah, so I didn't do that anymore. Even though I was home in LA for grad school, I had this. I am very connected to my YMCA at home. I grew up doing youth development there, even throughout grad school. But I switched from the fitness side to the youth development side solely, and so I felt that was a better use of my time and energy. And so I kind of just like squashed the teaching part, and I learned, or like I asked myself what I actually wanted to be doing rather than what I felt like I should do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think that was the beginning. And I think I learn more about my relationship with movement and my body, like just every day as I get older. And I think I've just grown to be a bit more compassionate with myself, because I think we can be mean even about our past selves. Like, well, I used to be able to do this.
Yeah.
Like, sure, I used to be a gymnast and I could do backflips and like run hurdles and all that stuff. And can I hurdle now? I don't think so. Like, I mean, maybe like one, but I was pretty good at it. And like, I've just learned to be like, okay, cool. That was a season of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And this season is different. So, what do I want to do to take care of myself and honestly have fun with it?
Yeah.
And yeah, I think it'll, as long as you choose that, like what sounds fun and what sounds good, I think you can have that joyous relationship with movement forever, right?
Yeah, I agree. It becomes more because, like, for me and how my brain was working, it felt like another to-do list that wasn't particularly like enjoyable. But
Yeah.
when you actually think that question you said of like, what do you actually want to do? It opens so many doors of just being able to be with your body and be joyful in moving, like that's like joyful movement, like it's very no brainer. And it's just so much more rewarding, and like I find myself like craving that so much more than any time that I was like, oh, I have to go like get on the elliptical or do whatever.
Yeah,
um,
I agree. And I think another thing that helped uh, me was restorative yoga. Have you ever taken a restorative class?
I haven't.
Okay. You've taken a yoga class?
Oh yeah, 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 I've been practicing for like, gosh,
Okay.
over a decade.
Yeah, for forever. And I'd done yoga before, and I was like very much into it. And but I decided to take a restorative class, and I thought it was just like kind of slower. I was unaware that I was literally not moving. Right? Like, you are supported by the props. And the idea of a restorative class is to let the props support you and for you to like open up and essentially like calm. And
Ooh.
the first class I did was harder than any track workout, any gymnastics workout I have ever done, because my brain was like raging. I was like, oh my God, I'm not moving. Oh my God, I could be walking. Oh my God. Like, and that to me was such a red flag. I was like, I gotta slow it. Like, I really gotta slow down. And I practiced the restorative for a long time. And I always tell, there's a really small yoga studio in where I'm from in LA. It's called Spiritual Heart. And I was so Chrissy, I'm like, you got me through grad school because I learned how to quiet my brain. I don't think a lot of
Yeah,
people can do that, like to sit there for an hour.
that actually sounds really hard. I think I would struggle with that.
It's hard, but it feels so good after. It feels like you do really connect to yourself again. And I
That's
think that
amazing.
was, yeah, and that was a huge part in learning. I think for me, with movement is that like the opposite is resting. And I don't think we do a whole lot of that because I think we,
Mhm.
right, in our culture, it's like, oh, so if you rest, like you should feel guilty about that, right? Like,
You're being lazy, or
yeah,
that's a term I personally just like, I don't actually believe that that's a condition. I don't know what you would define that as anyway, but I feel like if you aren't able to do something, it's often because you're like burnt out, or you've like we know that when you stigmatize yourself and you're like, I have to do this thing because I'm not good enough, it actually like doesn't create motivation, and we
right.
know that. So it makes so much sense that choosing not to would make you feel like shit because that's what our culture says. But I actually don't believe in it. I that makes me sad when people like describe themselves as lazy, because I'm like, tell me about what you actually do, or like what are you going through, like what's happening with you, and then like,
Right.
are you joking? Like that, I've never met a lazy person.
I, Me either, actually. That's a great point. Yeah, and yeah, I don't use that word in my vocabulary really.
Yeah,
Unless I'm intentionally being like, I'm gonna have a lazy day, like right where I like sit
yeah,
on the couch and do that.
yeah,
But yeah, I this past year I have done more resting than I have in my whole life. I've had a really hard emotional year, 2020 more
hmm,
so, and honestly 2021. It's all been hard.
yeah,
And I think I've just learned to like respect myself in that way and say like it's okay that I don't even feel like doing my daily walk, which is purely joyful for me. There were some days where that felt like a chore, and I had to learn that that was okay.
hmm,
Right? My body may have changed as a result of it, and that's also okay.
hmm.
You know?
Yeah, I think that's where that like, there's so many really negative things about like waking that happened during COVID, but also a lot of like compassion I've seen people throwing out. And I just think like still some of those messages have been like doused with a bit of diet culture, because it's like, why do we need to talk about the fact that we were in a pandemic and bodies change? Like, why can't we just, like what you
Mhm.
just said, was having a difficult time. Okay, I realized I did not feel good about doing my regular routine. My body changed, and that's what happened, rather than it being like, oh, don't be so hard on yourself. We were all going through this like collective thing. And I'm like, but what if that meant that many of us actually were running on fumes and our bodies were a certain way because we were having unrealistic standards about like
Mhm.
what we needed to be?
Yeah.
Like I'm curious about that for a lot of people who experience changes of like, if you like, what do you value? Like if it's pursuing being the like thinnest version of yourself, which is what we're told we need to do, is that actually realistic to keep it up forever, even when you are realizing you need to take breaks?
Well, I think a lot of people realize it's probably not realistic and they'll do it anyway,
Yeah.
right? Um, but yeah, I that's an interesting kind of take on that. Like, why can't it just be okay for my reason, right? Like,
Mhm.
just for me, like that's okay. And
Mhm.
but like, why do we have to have this collective reason to like validate? Almost, I think that's fine to validate, but it also is okay if we weren't in a pandemic too, right? Like if
Mhm.
we were having a rough year for other reasons, or you just were going through a time. I really do believe that like I'm noticing it in myself. I'm noticing me wanting to get back to my routine. I'm like,
Mhm.
oh, do I want to take a dance class? Would I like to add another hike into my week? Yes. Like I was not saying that for over a year.
Mhm.
And I think I always knew it would come back, but I'm really glad I've given myself this like long period of rest. And it's
Yeah.
okay if I'm like, you know, permanently enjoying different things. Like seasons
Mhm.
just change too. And I think in more of a permanent way than other seasons, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. No, absolutely. and it's really important to give ourselves that space. I think with like me looking at it like that, of why do we have to have this reason? I'm just very like skeptical of any message I ever see about anything in this, because I feel like there's in this realm of like trying to be anti diet culture, because there's been so many times where I like read something and I was like, like I like this. I'd probably like share this in a conversation. And then I kind of see it from a different perspective. And I'm like,
Mm.
shoot, that was actually really like I know we can't be perfect, but I'm always just trying to be very like thoughtful about the things, because we all are going to have different opinions, but yet there's so much, especially with learning so much more about like white supremacy being such a layer on dietetics, and how
Mhm.
just talking about that, like the thin privilege thing I had started to figure out, and then
Yeah.
realizing there's this other layer of like,
Yeah.
okay, so like, are these things actually helpful to share, to say, or is it still like just a random opinion that's like still kind of wrapped in diet culture? It's like so hard to tease those things apart. I think probably too hard about it sometimes. I'm just trying to like navigate
Oh,
like where I
same.
want my voice to be, I guess. Like with
Yeah.
people.
Yeah, I feel the same. I am an overthinker and a deep feeler and someone who only had like I really do have good intentions and I'm like, "Oh my god, how did I not know that?" Or I could
Yeah.
have done better. Um, and I think um, one of the things, have you read Brene Brown before?
Yeah.
She talks
Oh
about
gosh.
not bullshitting.
Yeah, I cannot for the life of me think of the book that I read.
That's okay. There's just a concept in one of her books that she is very passionate about, not like pretending like she knows things.
Oh,
Right?
I think I watched a clip from one of her talks where
Oh,
she
good.
specifically referred to that. So
Yeah.
yes, I know what you're
I,
talking about.
yeah. And so just along with what you're saying, and I think with all of us who are willing to learn, that's just like the most important part to like almost humble ourselves and be like, I don't know everything. Like I really don't. And I will do the work once I've
Mhm,
learned that maybe I didn't do a good job or that there is more to learn. And
mhm.
I think that we can it's so hard to like cultivate that compassion at the time. But I think if you look at it from a big lens, like how I hope that we could be more compassionate with ourselves to say, like, I'm
Yeah,
learning
yeah,
here.
for sure. I'm glad you brought up Brene Brown, because I feel like, the reason I like her so much is because she does call herself out on her like human qualities, where sometimes people who are like gurus and being able to help you in some area, or like a self-help book, there's a very like narcissistic tone that
Right.
follows it, and I'm like, that actually like really is a big turnoff for me
Huge
in
turn
like
off.
information, because I'm like, you can't be a perfect human, and you can't expect that by me reading your book I'm going to be one. So like, what gives here? Like, where's your flaws? Where's the pieces that you don't know everything? And I love her so much for like being
Right.
that way.
Yeah.
So
She
hard.
literally, yeah, she wrote a book called The Gifts of Imperfection, didn't she? I think that's one of her books.
Maybe.
Isn't that? Am I? Let me Google that.
I know, I'm curious. Are you
Oh,
looking it up?
watch me be wrong. Let me see. Gifts of imper. Watch it be like some Catholic thing. And it just like so seeped into me. No, okay. It's Brene Brown. We're
Okay,
fine.
look at you.
Oh my God. Um, yeah. Anyways, but yeah, I appreciate her and I appreciate anyone that could level with another human and be
Mhm.
like, I'm messy too. Nice to meet you. You
Yeah.
know, like we can all try to do our best and we're still gonna mess up. Like whether that's in like a therapeutic relationship, like, you know,
Mhm.
clinician to client or
Yeah.
like with our partners or our friends and our parents, like there's no one knows it all. There's-
No, and it, even though it can be like a oh shit kind of moment when you realize you mess up, it's
Mhm.
so much more rewarding to be able to like authentically like attempt repairing a
Yeah.
relationship, because there's certainly a difference between doing whatever you want and then saying you're sorry. That's like not authentic. But when you realize you mess up and you actually care about like that relationship, whether it's like you said with a patient or client, or it's someone you're close to, a significant other or family member, it just feels so much better to know that you actually can like be imperfect rather than that pressure of like when I feel like in my early 20s, that's how I felt of like, I'm just a terrible person if I'm
Yeah.
imperfect. And I had to like,
Yeah.
felt like I had to be, and realizing like every single person is going to make error, and like giving yourself compassion is
Right.
essential.
Yeah. And why do we even strive for that perfection? Right. And I think a lot of it has to do with diet culture,
Yeah.
honestly. At least outwardly perfection, right? In
Yeah.
terms of like anti-aging. Like aging's a privilege. That's
Yeah.
so cool. And I know, I could go on a whole rant. I don't
I
know.
wouldn't care. You should talk about it. If you're
Well,
passionate about it, talk about it.
no, I guess I haven't fully formed my opinion, but I
Okay.
somehow, this is all I'll say. I somehow ended up on, are you on TikTok?
I just use reels.
Okay, that's good. Um, but on TikTok, I somehow ended up on the Botox side of TikTok. I don't know how, but my whole For You page ended up curated. I was like, did I accidentally like one of these? Or like, what was it? I don't know. Like, was my phone hearing me? Did one of my friends say something? And it just got me thinking, I'm like, oh my goodness, we're so inundated by this like anti-aging and perfection situation. It's incredibly overwhelming and can make
Yeah.
someone who is maybe not as confident in their self, right, their imperfect self, to think, do I need that? Like
Right.
now? Right? Like, should I go get that? Question mark. I can't imagine how much of an influence it makes, because even it started to get me thinking. I was like, oh my gosh, preventative boat. Like, do I need this? And then I was like, hold on, Connie. Let's just take a moment. We're gonna
Mm-hmm.
first somehow get off that side of TikTok.
Being able
But
to move away
yeah,
from that.
yeah, I was like, not interested, not interested. Um, and I think anybody can do whatever they want with their bodies and
Yes.
whatever. It's just not, I don't know if that's something that I want for myself. And I do always look at it from the lens of like, we're just not perfect, but I feel like we're told that we're supposed to be. And that's just really hard.
Yeah. I think that's where I come from with it too, because like if that's something you want to do, like
Yeah,
whatever. But I'm more
totally.
interested in the psychology of like why are you doing this?
Yeah.
Because I feel like if you didn't feel that pressure in some capacity, like why do we care? Like I don't know if you heard recently when there was an unedited picture
Of,
of Khloe Kardashian that got posted, and then her whole team like was trying to get it off the internet,
yeah.
and she posted about it, and just saying like how she works so hard to like not be the fat sister anymore and all these
Mm,
things, and she's like, this is what my body actually looks like, and I don't want images of when
mm,
it doesn't look like this to exist. And it makes me, I don't like to pity people, but it makes me feel so sad, because I'm like, that must be just an overwhelming to have. I know most people won't feel sorry for the Kardashians, but I actually feel like this is like so crappy that that is like where she has to exist, of like not being able to feel like she's allowed to have anything that misrepresents this like
yeah.
perfect like vision that she's curated for herself, because of the things that she was constantly told and the comparisons made. And it's just like, and I know that's like they're super privileged and have tons and tons of money, and
Mhm.
the everyday situation, but I think about that, and it's like, if this person with all of this money and fame and everything still can't let a picture go on the internet that's not perfect, like,
Yeah.
and I know that that probably seems super unfair, of like, I've listened to a lot of things about like paparazzi and stuff like that,
Yeah.
and like can't imagine what that's like, but just
Oh
like
God, I'm so
at
glad that's
what
not my
point
problem.
of like access to all of these
Yeah.
things and like literally being able to change everything about yourself, and you're still feeling this like pressure to make sure people know that that's exactly what it is. It's like, is there ever a good enough? Is there ever this like perfect enough? And that's kind of where I'm like, I don't even want to go down the rabbit hole at all, because it's like, when does it end? When do
Right.
you feel satisfied?
Yeah. Yeah. That's the thing, right? Like, I don't know if there is a point, right? Because if the point is perfection, there is no such thing,
No.
right? We can't, like, control, right? And perfection are in the same vein. It's like we can't have a lot of either of those. I mean, there's some things we can control about ourselves, but like, controlling others, nope.
Yeah.
um, and like the whole perfectionism thing, it's hard. And it's also hard to accept an imperfect self. So, like, both
Right.
sides are hard.
Mhm. If
um,
anyone's listening who like uses Botox or any other like processes to change themselves and they really don't feel like it's because they're insecure, I would love to hear from you, because I'm convinced that it's like it's the pressure. So I'm totally
yeah,
open for an alternative opinion, but I haven't
same.
haven't accessed one yet. But
Yeah, I wonder. I think, like a perspective of like if it's impeding, like if there's like drooping, like something drooping, right? That's impeding your vision, or
sure.
I totally understand. Or like I think another concept of like cosmetic dentistry, right? With the eating disorder field, there
Yeah.
are a lot of individuals that need um, like a veneer or something
Yeah.
replaced because of the stomach acid, right? And with a like a purging history. And so I think I understand that there are so many different reasons to augment oneself.
Mhm.
Right? Or if you have breast cancer and need to have to get your boobs done after because you need to
Mhm.
have a mastectomy. Like, okay, fine,
Sure.
yeah. But I
Yeah.
also think anybody can do anything to their body that they desire.
Yeah,
It's just
absolutely. I don't know what it is about like the my brain that's like, I want to know if it's like a real reason or if it's like a, I think just because I really hate diet culture and the pressure,
yes,
so I'm like,
yeah. I think that's where
it doesn't have to be this way.
yeah. I think that's just where our brains are primed. So we're like, tell me why,
Yeah.
and maybe there doesn't have to be a reason, but I think that's my brain always loves to know like, why is it that way? And I think that's like probably annoying to a certain degree, but like it's how my brain works. So,
Yeah.
um,
Clearly
but
I'm
yeah.
right there with you.
What'd you say?
Clearly I'm right there with you on that one.
Yes.
Um yeah, so I was wondering, as we start to wrap up today, if there's anything we haven't talked about that you want to discuss or just like leave with listeners, with like why it's
Yeah,
important or worth it to pursue leaving diet culture and
mm,
all these things wrapped up in it behind.
sure. I think there's nothing I really like just open to talk about anything. I think we could talk for hours about a
I
bunch of
think
different
so
topics.
too.
Yeah.
You
Um,
have to just come sit in my closet
sure.
sometime.
I will sit in your closet with you. That sounds lovely, as long as there's a fan.
It's actually, like, not a tiny closet, like, it's a full
To
like,
walk
as
in?
tiny as our house is, it's a full walk-in, and I have literally space that another body could sit next
Oh,
to me here
great. I'll be
comfortably,
there.
so
That sounds great. I think in terms of just like what to leave people with, well, two things. One is I talked about teaching, and I think taking my college course is out of the question. But I do have I shrunk a good chunk of what I teach into like really just the gentle nutrition part of it. I shrunk it into about I think it ends up being 2.5 hour e-course on Teachable. That's
Ooh,
yeah, less than one session with a dietitian usually. And
yeah.
so if people are interested in learning like nutrition from that wider perspective of like what is health really and what are like
Mhm.
really the nuts and bolts of that gentle nutrition, right? What we talked about, that it's like it can be kind of simple. That might be something that you would enjoy. So just a plug for that.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I'll certainly put the link to that information in
Yeah.
show notes.
Perfect. Yeah. So that was fun for me to do because I got a lot of questions from people being like, well, I wish I could take your class. And part of me is like, yeah, I mean, me too. But also, I don't want you to have to sit through and like take quizzes and get grades. Like, that sounds horrible. So I made that. And
Maybe
the other piece is I, for people who are leaving diet culture behind, I think it can feel lonely
Mm.
because it is unfortunately a topic that brings people together, right? Like
Yes.
over the table or over like with conversation of like, oh, so what are you doing? Or I'm cutting carbs. I can't have the pasta. Like, and it can make you feel really like alienated at like if you're at a group dinner and everybody's on some sort of diet and you just really want what you really want, and maybe that involves carbs or is it burger or it isn't. I don't know. You can feel really alone in that. And I would just encourage people to know that it might feel lonely, but I hope that you can find community, maybe like on Instagram, or even just one friend that knows what you're doing and really wants to support you, or your partner or whatever. And that it gets a lot easier once you start. I think like the starting of it is just like really hard.
For sure. Yeah,
And
I
then
love that.
yeah, and it gets better. Um, and it can be really fun. Like I like my life is much more fun now. And I
Yeah,
love
I 100% agree with that. And I always, like you hinted at earlier, want to layer that with like, I'm aware of my thin white privilege.
it. Mhm.
And
Yes.
I do see so much benefit to leaving those pieces of diet culture and disordered behavior behind.
Yeah, I agree. Fully agree. Yeah, there's a whole lot wrapped in it, and there's probably a lot that we'll learn, maybe, like, probably 5 years into our career, we'll be like, "Wow, I didn't know that," but
Hmm.
at least for right now, that's what I can say as a 27-year-old dietitian doing my best.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Well, it's been so lovely. Thank you for
yeah.
coming on to talk with me.
Thank you for having me, it was so nice. I hope we can, hang out in real life, maybe
Yes,
in
I
your
would I
closet.
would love that. We can do things outside of the closet too, but yes, that would be great. Another fellow human dietitian person who cares about these things. It's nice to have those people around you.
Yes, yes, and you're in Denver, right?
Mhm.
Okay, great. We
Yeah.
can hang out, that'd be awesome.
Yes. Well, I will certainly keep in touch and, yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you. Alright, have a great weekend.
You too. Thank you for listening. Diet Culture is co-produced by myself and my brother, Nick Lewis. You can keep up with what's going on with Diet Culture on my Instagram page at Dietitian Dani Cast. If you prefer to watch rather than just listen, check us out on YouTube, and we always love ratings and reviews if you haven't done so already. Thank you so much for your support, and can't wait to talk to you next week.